ready to go? Move this out of the way. All right, hello everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. If you can't hear me, let me know. But we should be starting here in just a few seconds. We'll let everybody get kind of signed in, and then we will get going. How many people we got, Amy? 17, good. How's the sound? Can you guys hear me okay? I do have my swamp cooler on because it is so hot, but I don't want to make it to where it's hard to hear or anything. Good to go. And of course, a cloud comes over and makes it dimmer in here. It's sunny all day until we do a live stream, but that's just how it goes. So, we ready to jump right in? Let's do it. All right, we're going to cover a lot of things today, and this is one of those videos where I'm going to kind of give you the overview, and then you can kind of take it and run with it if you want to try this. It's a very simple thing, so if you've not made a knife or done a handle on a knife, don't fret. It's a very easy one. It's a good project to make for yourself or a gift. I made a knife for a friend that went elk hunting a couple years ago, and it was a cool thing because they got to use it for their elk, so you can do whatever you want to do in that regard. Now, what we're going to be using today, supplies are kind of cool. So we are going to be using a pre-made knife blade. So this knife is shaped, hardened, and sharpened, and obviously it's just missing the handle. And you can see we have different sizes and shapes. This is a large Tonto. This is like an 8-inch spear point. This is probably my favorite. Skinning knife, so if you do have a hunter in your family, that's a great one. And the reason we're using these knives today is if you were to take a piece of blade steel raw and shape it and do all that, that's no problem, but you have to have a way to heat it up to harden it, and you have to have a way to put the bevels on it and things, so it's kind of a different animal, and we wanted to make this a simple project using only what you already have for pen making and other woodworking. So it's not going to be a lot of knife equipment in this one, although I may show you, but it's not going to be a lot of them. Hey, Haley, will you run out and just let Paul know we're recording? And the bin is right there by the door. But we wanted to make it easy so that you can do this at home. So let me show you what we're going to use. I'm going to do the 8-inch because it is one of my favorites, the 8-inch Tonto. And I'm using Choya knife scales, which I wanted to show some knife scales here in just a sec, but we'll go over that. I'm going to use 2-part epoxy, the BSI epoxy from Turner's. And then I've got my safety stuff like my gloves, my respirator for when I'm sanding, my eyeglasses, and you will need sandpaper and some clamps. So other than the sander, that's kind of all you need for this project. It's not going to be real in-depth. Oh, I forgot to mention the pins. We are using brass pins. So these are cut to length. And that's what we'll pin the scales to the knife blank with. So just to go back here a step, I wanted to show these cool scales. These are scales we make here at Turner's, the Choya, the pine cone, and the honeycomb. These micartas are Ken Frisbee's awesome micarta. That's denim micarta there. Really cool stuff. So if you're doing a knife handle and you want a really awesome scale, we've got a ton of choices. And these are just a few of the colors. We probably have 20 different colors of all these, so it's really cool. So you can kind of tailor it to what you're doing for yourself or anyone else. Let me get these out of the way. All right. Now, what I've done is I've prepared this because what I want to show you is the handle glue up, and then I want to do some basic shaping on my standard sander. So I've taken a set of Choya scales like this, and each set comes with 2 scales in there, so you see that. And I've given them a rough shape to the handle. So if you look, I'll put this pin in so you can see it in place. It's not exactly to the metal, but I just cut it with the bandsaw to where it was close. And the reason is we're going to kind of fine tune everything with the sander, and that's how we're going to get right up to the metal. Now, one thing I have done ahead of time, and this is kind of important, especially your first one, you may not know this, is I did sand and polish this front shoulder. So you can kind of see it's rounded and it looks kind of shiny compared to the rest. So I did do that, and how I did that was once I got the rough shape and the holes drilled, I put the two scales together, I sanded it, and then I went to the buffer and just gave it a quick buff. And the reason being is once this is glued to the metal, you can see that you have a real tight spot to get to. So if I was trying to sand this front shoulder, I would surely be hitting my blade, and that would do some damage to it. So by doing this ahead of time, I kind of saved myself risking damaging the blade or even marking the blade up. I guess it wouldn't ruin the blade, but it just wouldn't look good, and we're doing all this work, so we want it to look as good as we can. So this is your basic layout of how it's going to go together. Now there is one thing you could add. A material called liners are often added, and that's usually a thin variation in color. So like where this is red, we might do a black or a white or something contrasting. And that way when we have these scales on here, we would have our scale, the dark color, the knife blade, the dark color, and then the other scale. Now I'm not going to do that because this is just going to be a simple hunting knife, and I think the cholla will look really good just like this. So let's get this glued up, and then we can do the fun stuff, which is the shaping. Now, a couple of things I like to do when I'm gluing up, and let me preface this by saying I am no expert knife maker. So if you came here for expert knife maker, that I am not. I'm a learning knife maker. I probably made 50 or 60 like this with just putting the handles on. And more recently, I've done more of the complete knife making, but handles to me is the most fun. So I've done that the most because I like it. But this is just how I do it. Do it your way. Figure out the best way for what tools you have, and that's all you need to worry about. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to tape this up. And I'm going to get this fairly close to this. And I'm wrapping this blade up. I don't want to go too far on this side. And I'm doing this for two reasons. One, I want to keep any adhesives off of my blade when I glue the handle. And two, I want to cover the blade. So you see this protective sleeve on here. I went ahead and left that on there. But I'm also going to wrap some tape around it. And this just, if you have an accident where you catch this on the sander or you drop it or it slips, surprisingly this tape can be a big help to not cut you. So in addition to protecting the blade, it can be a little bit of a safety thing. Now obviously it's not going to save everything because it is a blade, but you can see I can squeeze that with no issue because it's with the plastic and the tape, it's enough. So I like to fit everything up and lay it out in reverse. So I'm going to put the pins in. And you want to do all this dry. You don't want to fit this up the first time with glue on it because no doubt you will have some issue and those pins won't go through and you'll crack a scale or the glue will start to set on you, and you don't want to wait for that. So that's how I set it up, and then I like to just kind of pull it apart and lay the pieces how they're going to get glue, just like that. And the pins I can set aside. Now let's talk epoxy. So I'm going to use a 5-minute quick epoxy. You can use any epoxy you want, 5, 15, or 30. And something to note about epoxies is the longer the cure time, so in this case 30 minutes is the longest we carry, the less brittle it is. And let me tell you why that's important. Glues, in terms of brittleness, a lot of times are like for impact. So if I glue something and I'm using a brittle glue, like a 5-minute epoxy might be more brittle than a 30. If I hit that, the glue is more likely to shear or break loose because it's hard and brittle. Whereas a 30-minute epoxy, if I hit that, it might have a little more give to it, a little more squish, if that makes sense, although it's not squishy. And it won't necessarily break or be brittle. So keep that in mind. Typically, I like to use the longest epoxy that I have available. In this case, the 15-minute is not open, but the 5 is, so I'm going to use the 5. But if I had 30, I would use that. All right, we have a question. And if anyone has a question throughout this, I'll do my best to answer it. Just throw it out there. And I've got Haley moderating. She'll read me your question.
UFC Fantastic asks, when do you drill the holes?
Oh, good question. So the question was from USC Fanatic. Is that it?
Yes.
When do you drill the holes? So you want to do that. Excellent question, because I skipped right over that.
And how?
And how? So what is ideal, if this was your square, like we'll use this piece of wood as a guide, you would place the knife where you want it on here. You would mark the holes for your knife on one side. So I'd mark them, I would go drill them, and then I would end up with this. And once I have that, I can put the pins through. And I guess that doesn't make sense. I could put the knife on the other side, drill those, and then you can line them up. So you want to do all this ahead of time, and you want to do it before you do any shaping on the front. So it's best to drill your holes, put your two pieces together, and then cut and shape the front. That's also when I kind of trace the blank roughly, and I go to the bandsaw and cut it out. Like I said, I'm not trying to be close to the metal because I'm going to do that with the sander, but this just gets me in the ballpark for my setup. So excellent question. You want to do that ahead of time, and you want to make sure everything fits. I wouldn't say loosely, but definitely not super tight, because if anything is tight, you got 3 pins. If one of them is crooked or offset and you go to put these on there, you're going to be pounding it, and it's a good chance to break a scale. So you want to do that ahead of time and just make sure everything fits. So that was an excellent question. And we have another question.
So we asked, if you have to drill out the holes on the handle, that's the key. You have to have available pins with the existing holes.
Okay, Zoe asked if I had to drill out the pinholes in the handle. I'm not sure if she means this or the knife, but I'll answer both. In the handle material, you definitely do. In these blanks that we showed, you do not, because they come with these pins. Now, these are a different type of pin. They're like a socket cap and retainer pin. I don't personally like these because you have to do a certain thickness of handle. So I rarely use these. I like to do my own pins. Plus, I like the look of like a solid pin or a mosaic pin. So these are already drilled. So the one here was already drilled. These happen to be 3/32, and I just tested that with a drill bit. And then we carry a variety of pin material, so I grabbed the 3/32, and it fits right in. Now, if you had to drill a new hole, Zoe, your question is relevant because this is a hard blade, meaning if you take this to the drill press, even with the best drill bit, this is going to be a nightmare to drill because it's been hardened for blade retention. So you would not want to do that without heating up the spot to soften the material, and then you could drill it. So ideally, you don't want to drill any additional holes in these because they're hardened, and that's kind of one of the reasons we're using these, is because we're assuming that not everybody has a forge or a heat treating oven to treat their metal. So these are already done. So you kind of have to use the provided holes because of that without causing yourself some headache. Now, one thing to keep in mind, there's 4 holes actually. This is considered a lanyard hole, but you can see I drew my line and I didn't drill that hole. And the reason being is I don't need a lanyard on this one or want a lanyard, so I just skipped it. You can cover up a hole. I don't have to do 3 pins. I could do 2 pins or 1 pin. I could just do the outside or just the middle. But the more pins generally, the more strength. And personally, I kind of like the look of pins. It makes me think of a knife. So I did all 3, and I think that's just preference. So you could do whichever way you want. Good questions. Excellent. We got another question.
Myra asked, are these pins specific to the blade?
Say that one more time.
Are these pins specific to the blade?
Are the pins specific to the blank? No, these are brass.
The blade?
Oh, the blade?
The knife, yeah.
Nope, they're just the right size. So these are 3/32, I believe, and I can verify that. And that's what these are. They come in different sizes. So you might see like this hole is bigger. That's a lanyard hole. There could be other sizes, And you would just need to know the size of the hole for whatever blank you're using or whatever hole you drilled, and get the right size pin. Now these pre-made blanks that we offer do fit the 3/32, I believe. I'm sorry, 3/16. I'm saying 3/32. That's tiny. 3/16. So they're fairly small, but they work very well and they fit these pre-drilled holes. So if you're going to make one of these, the 3/16 is what you want. Excellent questions. I hope you guys are going to try these. So we'll any other questions, and then I'll jump into this. Okay. So what I've just got a piece of cardboard here. I'm sure most of us have used epoxy. It's a fairly simple thing. 5 minutes is fairly quick when you're doing two sides and talking, so I'm going to move quickly. But you want to just mix up a healthy amount. It's probably not enough. And you don't have to measure this, but you do want to try to get the same amount. So I'm going to try to make a circle that is that big. That looks good. And then you want to stir it really nicely. And the clock is ticking. So I'm going to bring these together. Now, this is a messy process, so I brought gloves, although one blew on the floor. Let me grab it. Because I will no doubt, everything I said on this table blows off because the swamp cooler's right above me. But that's nice because it's so hot. So I'm going to wear gloves. You could get away with not wearing gloves, but I don't love epoxy all over my hands. So stir this up really well. Now, one cool thing with epoxy, little fun tip here, is you could add color. So if for some reason your wood, maybe it was a burl wood and there might be little voids, you could add black or some color and it would fill in and it would look really good. So what I'm going to do is just make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich here and spread this around just like that. And you can see I got a bunch in my hole. That's okay. I'm going to get this. And I want to cover every bit of this. I don't want anything dry, because if it doesn't squeeze in there, it's going to stay dry. So you can see there's a healthy amount of epoxy on there. It's gooey. Now, take your pin, roll it in the epoxy, stick it in your first hole, roll it in the epoxy. You want it kind of sloppy like that, so where it just doesn't have any chance of being in the hole dry because it's got so much goop. And I'm pushing it down, and that's okay. It's coming out the other side. Now, you probably don't think I need it, but I might. So I'm going to go ahead and spread. Now, I'm not going to go too far north of the hole because I don't want to get it on the blade. But I'm not worried about getting it on the edges. That's no big deal. So I'm going to flip this, line it up, and that works nicely. Oh, I should have buttered that first. I'll do it now. It doesn't matter if I get epoxy all over these pins, and in fact, you kind of want to. You want the epoxy squeezing out of this thing because that means you got enough. If you got, nothing coming out, you might be a little shy. So you can see I haven't picked this up or moved this, and it's because of that, because of the epoxy. Now, I'm going to put this on here. One thing I want to do, I'm going to have epoxy coming out the front. I want to grab a paper towel, which I did, but it blew away. Let me grab another one. You can prepare and prepare, but you always lose something. All right. Check this out. This won't blow away. Giant roll. Okay, so before I pick this up, I'm going to push on this, and I'm going to do my best to get any epoxy off of there. Because I can buff it and polish it off, but it'll save me a lot of time by getting that off of there. And then now you can see why I put that tape. So really, that's the only amount of epoxy I could have is right there. On the rest of it, I'm protected. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to squeeze. And I'm going to wipe as good as I can and try to get off as much epoxy as I can. And don't worry, you don't have to get it all off. It's no big deal. Kurt's going to hate me because these are blowing all over. Now I'm going to set that right there. And I'm going to grab a clamp. And you can use any clamp. I'm a super fan of these quick clamps because they just work so well for everything. But use whatever clamps you have. You don't need anything special. But you see these pins are assuring my alignment. So I just like to stick them to where they're kind of sticking out a little bit on both sides. There, can you see that? And that way I know I've got good clampage. Literally, everything's blowing to the ground. Huh?
Making me laugh a lot.
Sorry. All right. So we'll get this flipped around here. And I could have opened these up ahead of time, but I didn't. Now these two clamps are more than enough, in my opinion, but feel free to stick as many clamps on as you want because you don't want any space. Now there's a lot of squeeze out going on here. Yeah, not even gonna try. Anything you can wipe off is good because you're gonna have to sand it off later. So it's not a big deal, but it'll just help you. Now look at this. Maybe it's the super hot temperature, but I don't think that was 5 minutes and it's already starting to set. So I probably just made it in time and I didn't really dilly-dally that much, did I? I mean, it didn't seem like it. So that is your clamped up knife. Now, you can let this sit for 5 minutes, but I'd probably let it sit overnight at a minimum because you want it to be cured all the way through inside. Did we have a question?
Yeah, we have a question.
Let's have it.
Says, do you want wax paper or something
On the clamp?
Yeah.
The question was, can you use wax paper or something on that? You absolutely can. I hardly ever do because usually when I'm trying to like hold the wax paper and like get the clamp, I always mess something up. So I kind of just make a mess, but that's why I use cardboard. I just cut a piece off a box. Now this whole thing can just go in the trash. And I didn't get any on my table. I rarely get it on my clamp because as you saw, it was starting to set. It's not even going to drip. Now, if I was using 30-minute, it might be dripping out for a minute or two or 5, and that could create a little bit of a mess. But usually epoxy, especially on clamps, you can just chip it off real easy with a screwdriver or something. So I don't worry about that just because of the time. And I'm kind of messy with everything anyway, so I've accepted it. Any other questions? All right, now the fun part. I'll grab a drink. Okay, so you see this? Now imagine I just unclamped it. Ooh, magic. So this one I made yesterday in preparation of this. It's this one's brother. So I guess I could make like a double. So you could like have 2 on each side or 1 on each side. But this is the exact same knife, same choya, same pins, and we're just gonna proceed. So you can see here, it is glued up. It's not sticky or tacky, but I did the exact same shape, the exact same length of pin, so everything is ready to go. And you can see that by wiping the epoxy, there's very, very little on there, and just with some careful buffing, I can probably knock that out and make it look really good. And we'll just buff that with the whole handle. So let's do it.
Before you start,
Yep.
are the 4 knife blanks on the table all there is, or is there a chef knife blank as well?
So good question. The question was, are these the only ones we have, or is there a chef knife? At the moment, we don't have a chef knife. I'm sure they're out there, so definitely you could find some. Right now, we just have these. I think we have one other one, so there's 4. But we will be expanding that, and we are going to try to produce some ready-made blanks like this in-house and have them heat treated and ground for you. So if you just want to do handles, you could. But I don't have a chef knife right now, or chef blade right now. Good question, though. Okay, so let's get ready here. I'm gonna need my mask, and the first thing I'm gonna do is tape this again. So this one is out of the tape, but I'm going to tape it up. And again, I'm gonna tape it for 2 reasons. One is to protect the blade, and two is to protect me. Now, I've never cut myself with a knife that I was working on, so that's not a big deal. Just kidding. I do it all the time. Amy, you can't laugh. You guys might not be able to hear, but Amy's laughing because she's seen many a times I walked in with bloody fingers. It's just part of the gig. All right. So we're going to tape this up. Now, in the glue up process, you know, like I didn't tape this one obviously when I glued it up. You could do it then and not have to do it now, which is what I did just now. But this is most important for when you're doing the shaping because one, you're going to be handling this and doing all kinds of weird movements. So you have more risk of the knife getting caught or moved or thrown or grabbed by the machine. And also, we're going to put the knife blank or blade in the vise in a minute. So we want to protect it. We don't want to leave a bunch of marks on it from that. So I'm going to do this and then we'll be ready to go. Now, I'm going to kind of, like I said, I want to just kind of show you the basics and kind of you can take it from here with what you have tool-wise. There's all kinds of specific knife making equipment out there. That's awesome. But it's also kind of expensive depending on what you get. So you don't need the fancy stuff. If you have it, that's awesome. But I'm going to show you how you can do a lot of this stuff just with what we have. Now, brass pins. Do we have a question?
Yeah, before we start with the next section.
Yep.
Which grinder do you prefer, and can you use these on most belt sanders?
Which grinder?
Yeah.
Can you use what on most belt sanders? Or the knives?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So you can make these knives. We have a 1x32 little tiny guy from Rikon. I think it's like 99 bucks or maybe less, 79 bucks. And you could make amazing knives with that. You don't need anything fancy and you don't need anything specific. Of course, the specific knife ones are nice. It's just like anything. If you spend more money, you usually get more features. But don't get hung up on I have to have a knife grinder or a specific thing. You certainly don't. Use what you've got. We get reminded of it constantly, so it's kind of easy for us to understand. But people will come in and show us the most amazing knife I've ever seen. And I'm thinking to myself, this person must be a pro. They must have all the equipment. And then they're like, yeah, I used a Harbor Freight hand sander. That was it. And you're just like, what? How does this? It doesn't matter what you have, just what you do with it. So don't fret. Just give it a try. Oh, Ricky, yeah. Rick knows. You don't have to have specifics, but if you do, it does make it a little easier or faster in some cases. Now, what I'm going to use today is my standard bandsaw to trim off the pins. I'm going to use a Laguna 12-inch disc combo sander. So this is my common woodworking sander. I do everything on here. I trim tubes, I square blanks, I sand pen trays. So this is not specific for any one thing. It's a general machine. Now there is, of course, knife grinders, like I said. This is a specific knife grinder made by Wirtz Machine, and it's great, but you don't need it. I'm not going to use it today. But one thing you want to keep in mind is when you're deciding what you're going to make, if you're using a pre-made blade like this, is you want to look at the shape and what you can do with what you have. So if I look at this one, let me pull this one over. If I look at this blade, and I'm looking at the top here, because I'm going to do a lot of my sanding on the top belt, you can see I can walk through almost all the curves on the bottom. I can certainly walk through the curves on the top, and I'm not hitting any big corners. Whereas this little guy, maybe I can, maybe I can't. You can see I can't. I can't hit the depth of the finger. So I may have to use some hand tools to get in there, or actually do it by hand, because this is what I have. Now, if you have a small, like 1x30 or 1x48 sander, you probably have a belt at the top that you can use. The cool thing is you can use the top, you can use the sides, you can use the back, whatever works for you. So I kind of look at that with what I'm going to do, because now I know I got to do some extra work in these finger grooves. So I may or may not want to do that on this one. That's just what I would decide.
Another question. Do you provide local heat treating service for folks that grind their own knives but don't have a forge?
So the question is, do we provide local heat treating service for people who make their own knives but don't have a forge? I've never been asked that before, so we don't. I wonder if we could. I'd have to look into that more. So reach out to me either in a message or an email, and we'll talk about that, but I've never been asked that before. I don't know of anyone that does it. Locally, if you're in the Phoenix area, Iron Rhino Forge is who I recommend for learning how to blacksmith, learning how to make knives. There's two people over there, Avi and JC, that are really great blacksmiths and really great knife makers. They may do that for you over there. Certainly you could take a class and do a bunch of heat treating, I would imagine. So check out Iron Rhino. That'd probably be your best bet.
One more.
Yep.
What grit are on the sanders?
Oh, good question. What grit are on the sanders? So this is, like I said, this is my all-around sander I use for everything. I've got 120, let me think, 120 on here, and I believe 100 on this one. So these are set so I can do everything kind of not super fine, but not super rough, but 120 and 100. Now, if you had multiple belts, obviously that's going to help in the process, because you could change the belt here and really like fine tune it. But if you do like I do and you just have it set all the way all the time, then you're good to go. Good questions, everyone. All right, so I'm going to trim this up really quick. And what I'm going to do is just basically use the side of the blank to knock these pins off. And I'm just going to use the regular bandsaw. I've got a 10 tooth per inch blade on here. I am going to leave it kind of high so you can see it. Obviously, normally you'd want it down a little bit. But the nice thing is I've got a good square bottom, so I can just slide this in. And that easy you can cut brass with your bandsaw. Now, if you have I'll talk here in just a sec. Now, if your bandsaw has a really high or low grit, low tooth blade on it, like a 3 tooth, I wouldn't recommend that. I generally keep a 10 or a 12 because there again, I use it for metal, I use it for wood, not one thing specific. So that's why that one works. If you got a lower tooth, you might be careful. Question? Okay. Now I only cut one side, so you can see how easy it is. But the other thing is, when you go to do this, you don't even have to cut these, because typically the pins are made of brass or copper or something, and you can literally use your sander. Oops, I pulled my head down. So all 3 pins in probably 10 or 15 seconds are nice and flat. So now I've got the side I cut, the side I sanded, and I'm ready to go. So this is kind of where the fun begins. And I'm going to go through this and do some of these sides, and we're going to show you some stuff. I'm not going to do the whole blade, because I'd probably spend a solid hour, maybe hour and a half on a blade like this, or on a handle like this. And that's just preference. I would assume as you do more and more, you'll get faster or slower depending on how you work. But let's do a little bit of shaping. And what you're going to see is this gap where I've got glue in here. I'm going to bring that all the way down to the blade. This is called a full tang knife. So the whole tang of the blade, or the back of the blade here, is exposed next to the scales. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to grind all this down to where we meet the metal's edge, and then we're going to sand and polish that whole thing. I guess I could have left this on. Okay.
start with this back. And I'm just looking to see how far I have to go. So I'm almost to the metal.
Now, when I'm working this, I like to, sorry, I'm going to be taking the dust mask off a lot. When I'm working this, I like to work the belt from side to side. If you just sit in one spot, you're going to definitely wear your belt quick. But you can see how fast. I've got a little bit of gap with epoxy there, a little bit of gap in epoxy there. But you can see how quickly I made it to the metal. So this is, like I said, a 100. Pretty aggressive for the metal, but we'll show you how you can kind of fine tune that in just a minute.
Looks pretty good. Yeah. See a little bit of gap there. I'm just catching up to that side. Okay, I'll get on this side. Almost. Okay.
Now, one thing, well, one, you can see why I'm wearing a mask. This is all that dust. This is resin, wood, and epoxy, so I definitely don't want to breathe it. But you can see how quickly I got to the metal. I've got a little bit here and a little bit here. And I'm really trying to look across this and keep this straight. As I'm sanding these edges, if I rock the blade one way or the other, I'm going to end up with, a shape to my handle. And I want to do all that at the end. So I want to get it all to the metal, and then I'll do the shaping, which is what I like to do.
Oh yeah. So
this is good. You can see I got a little bit of crooked. And that could just be trying to stand to the side so y'all can see, but a little bit crooked, but we can fix that. Now, this is where you want to start to grab your knife and see what you want for a feel. One person's hand might be different than the others because you might have somebody with a little tiny hand or some giant, what we call curt hand, giant hand. and you want to make sure that they can grip it. So if you're making this for somebody specific, you might ask them or look how big their hands are and then kind of shape it to them. But what's cool is we're going to use the same top edge here, and we're going to start working on these square edges. So basically I still have a square block. My pins are sticking up just a little bit, except for where I sanded them. But I still have square edges, and I'm just going to work one side to show you how quickly and fun that can be.
So I'm going to take it, I'm going
to rotate it, and I'm going to shape it along that edge.
and now you can see that square bevel.
So one thing to keep in mind is placement. Hopefully you've noticed that my belt is spinning this way, and everything I'm doing, I'm moving into the rotation. If I'm trying to push, let me think how to explain this. I don't want to push it to where it can grab and flick up, right? So I'm pushing it like this. If it were to come out of my hands, it's going to literally go straight out like that. It's not going to push the other way or come around fast. I hope that makes sense. You can probably see that in what I'm doing. But I've just taken the edge, and I've taken that square edge and made it just that slight bevel down to there. And let's do the inside.
So I'm going to look at it, square, and then you can see the line here, and then it follows around. And I do have a little high spot, so I'm going to actually clean that up. All right.
So I think this is a good example of the handle. Now, some people like really deep grooves. They like no like symmetrical edges, whatever the case may be. But you can see from a square stance and kind of rough to having a little bit of a bevel on the edge and a smooth front. So in my hand, that feels really good. It's still wide, so if I wanted to narrow it, I could take more material off and continue to bevel that. I could actually take it all the way off and then bevel it up to the metal there. It's really just preference at that point. But I think that kind of gives you the idea of how you can sharpen, or not sharpen, how you can shape on a sander. A 1x32, which is going to be a fraction of a sander like this, would work even better because you'd have the little disc and you'd have a belt. The belt would give, so you can actually push for shaping. So when we use a belt that gives, you can actually push into it, and that will help you with that shaping on there. Now, let's go to the vise over here. Most of us have a vise in our shops, and if not, you can look on Craigslist, because there's always a million vices on Craigslist. And what's cool about the vise is it'll hold it for you. So you can now do some sanding on the vise. Now, depending on what you're going for, you may like those sharp edges or you may not, but you can quickly sand on a vise to get out any shapes you don't want. The downside to a vise versus a holder meant just for knives is the knife holder, you can actually rotate it around. So you can kind of work on a side on top and rotate it. So that's the trade-off. If you don't want to, if you want to use something you already have, you might just have to deal with the shape a little bit. But I'm going to show you, I'm going to cut this 180. This is Abranet, and I like to cut these into strips. And what you can do, and this makes it really nice for shaping, so keep in mind that sharp edge there. This is 180. I can really go to town, and this is where your time comes in. Anytime you hand sand, you're going to spend a little time. But then you can give it some cleanup. Now, obviously, I'm doing this just a brief amount, not to a finished product, but I just want to show the concept of what we're going for here. So where that was a more defined square edge like this, with that little bit of hand sanding, not only did I sand it, but I got that nice roundness to it. So I hope that shows up in camera. The other thing is you're starting to see the choya, how cool the choya skeleton is, which is really nice. So you can flip it. You know, and honestly, most of us are pretty handy. You could probably make a little jig for your vise out of some wood that would hold it the other way as well. But I'm going to go on this top here, and I'm going to hand sand it just down. And maybe come over here, Amy, see if you can get this, just to kind of show this sharp edge here and how quickly it goes away. By having these strips, I can really work the edge nice. Now, if I didn't want to sand away those strips, I could have put this on a block and worked it flat to keep the edge, the sharp edge, or if I want to work it flat on the top. But I like to use the strips to kind of give my handle a nice soft grip feel to it. And I can do the back the same way. And this is, I don't know, I kind of find this fun. I put a podcast on or some music and just go to town, and you can knock out a handle pretty quickly or spend a lot of time on it for something really, really nicely done, really polished, smooth. You can also do handwork in there if you want to engrave or anything. But here, let's come out here in the light. But that's a pretty good way to do your handle. So you see the original square side and then just a quick shape on that. And I hope you guys saw why we did that in the beginning ahead of time. But I hadn't even touched this side. That was straight off the 120, so it's still pretty rough with some 220 or 320 on there. You're really going to shine this up. You can use all the way up to 600 on your resin and make it really nice. So that's a good way to do it. Any questions, Haley? All right. So I'm not going to do the rest of this on camera because obviously, like I said, it's going to probably be another hour or so to finish this handle. We'll post some pictures of it tomorrow or the next day. But once you're done with this, like I said, the blade's been treated. It's all done. You really only have to do the handle. So I would sand this and polish it. I'd probably use axe wax on something like this because you're going to shine up the resin as well as the choya wood. Now, when we do our choya scales, they're stabilized, so they're going to polish really nice, just like resin. But axe wax is a good all-around one because it'll protect the handle. You can use it on the blade. You can use it on the sheath if you need to. So it's a real good all-around product. If I wasn't going to do that, I'd probably do something like a penetrating oil, like the walnut oil or the Mylans. I would rub it, and then I would buff it with a buffer because it works really good. And we have posted some other videos of buffing handles if you want to see that. So it's really kind of a cool process.
Quick
Question.
sell the liners Chad talked about earlier?
Do we sell the liners that Chad talked about? No, unfortunately we don't. Liners can be anything though. A lot of times they're a material called G10, but a lot of times they're like a heavy construction paper, which is really weird, like a fiberboard. It's probably something we will carry down the road as we expand our knife stuff, but at the moment I don't have any liners. But you can also make and cut your own liners. You can use veneers. Wood veneers make cool liners. Just make sure you really put a lot of epoxy in between those layers. Yeah, good question. So hopefully you guys had fun watching that, and hopefully you'll try this, make a knife for yourself. If you do, be sure and tag us. We love seeing what you guys make. It's a part of the fun for us, really. But if there's no other questions, nothing? Question.
So you sand to 600 and then you buff with axe wax?
Oh, the question was you sand to 600 and then do you buff with the axe wax. So if it was just wood, I would sand to 600 and then put the axe wax on it. It'll look awesome. If it's a wood resin or just a resin, I would sand to 600. I'd probably buff first and then put axe wax on it. And just apply by hand with like a buffing motion. And that really makes it look good. We haven't had axe wax long, probably a couple months is all, but we tried it first to see if we were kind of like, it sounds too good to be true. We tried it and really liked it. We've been using it on a ton of our stuff, so then we decided to offer it. So we do carry it now, and that's why, because we tried it for several months first. So it's pretty cool. But you could put it right on here, this roughness, and it would look a lot better. But if you do go a little bit higher in the grit, it'll definitely give you a little better shine, but good protection. So if you have any questions or you want to know about any of the stuff I showed, on the front page of Turner's Warehouse, I put all the stuff, so you can check that out. If you have questions, shoot us an email, give us a call, whatever the case may be. If you're local, come on down and say hello. Hopefully you'll give knife making a try. It's a lot of fun. Everyone needs a knife. I mean, you got to cut stuff, you got to do whatever. So make yourself a knife, make one for a friend or family member, and I think you'll have a good time. If you haven't done it already, be sure and subscribe, and please like the video and share. Everyone always says share this video. What'd you say to me? Oh, next week. So next week is a big demo. Haley is doing a demo. Quick flash to Haley. Haley is doing a demo on ring making. Now the cool part is Haley was already going to do a ring making demo, but since I don't have to do a demo next week, I'll be in Nome, Alaska. But the big highlight is Haley's doing a ring making demo. It's going to be a lot of fun. We were talking about it earlier. She's got some cool tips and tricks for you guys. So make sure you subscribe so you can watch that demo. And please come on, support her, ask her a ton of questions, get her going. It'll be a lot of fun.
Before we leave, one last question.
One last question before we leave. Go ahead.
How do you fix the epoxy voids next to the blade?
How do you fix the epoxy voids next to the blade?
Yeah, like,
Well, so most of this you're going to sand. So there's a little bit of a void right there, tiny bit. Most of it you're going to keep sanding till you get to the blade. So I'm going to work that area just a little more, and it's going to be right mesh up to the blade. Now you can see the handle material and the blade where I've sanded are like perfectly aligned. So we got a nice glue line in there. We squeezed it nicely. It's not coming apart. So you really shouldn't have any of those. If for some reason you did have a void that you can't sand to or you don't want to sand to, you could fill it with a little more epoxy or even some CA and then hand sand it down to where you want. But in this case, that dip is part of the design anyway, so I'm just going to sand that a little more to get to that void. Good question. A lot of good questions today. Thanks, everybody. All right, we are out of here. Hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you next week for Haley's ring demo.